I had been away on business for 6 months and decided to head home early to surprise my girlfriend. To my shock, a man answered the door. He was standing there in my slippers, holding my spatula, and after a brief pause of confusion, he casually told me to just leave the delivery on the porch. I informed him that this was my girlfriend's house, but he just gave me a smug smile as if it were the most natural thing in the world, saying that my house was essentially his house too. He then pulled a box of pills out of his pocket, revealing a pack of condoms tucked underneath the packaging. "It is time for my meds," he shouted toward the kitchen. "Ava, give me a glass of water." After spending 6 long months away on a business assignment, I rushed home early to surprise my girlfriend, never imagining a strange man would be the one greeting me at the door. He didn't show even a hint of guilt and had the nerve to invite me inside, telling me to relax and act like I was in my own home. I stood there stunned for a moment before asking him if this was his place. He gave me a bizarre look and asked if I'd lost my mind, pointing out that this was clearly my house and questioning how I could fail to recognize my own front door. I just nodded slowly, doing my best to keep my temper under control. Right as I was about to lose it, Ava stepped out of the kitchen to explain the situation. She claimed that this guy was just her personal chef and a dining companion she hired, so she wouldn't have to eat alone, telling me there was no reason to be suspicious. However, my blood started to boil when I noticed them using a matching set of bowls, drinking from identical mugs, and lounging together on the sofa with coordinated throw pillows. I confronted him again, demanding to know if he thought she was his girlfriend. He looked at me with a mocking grin and told me I must be going senile if I couldn't even recognize my own woman. I tried to process the absurdity of the situation, but he kept going, telling me to go ahead and eat because he needed to take a Viagra soon for the big plans he and Ava had later that evening. That was the final straw, and in a blind rage, I kicked him squarely in the chest and sent him sprawling to the floor. To my surprise, my frenemy had the audacity to act like the victim, yelling that there was nothing going on between him and Ava and claiming he only carried those pills because of a pre-existing heart condition. I sneered and told him it was a good thing he was already sick because I was about to give him the exact treatment he deserved. My company's international operations in London had finally stabilized, so I had secretly booked a flight back to Seattle a day early to surprise Ava for her birthday. During the entire flight, I played out all the different ways she might react when she saw me at the door. I was sure that with the expensive gift I had picked out, she would be absolutely thrilled, and I even brought a small camera to capture her expression so we could look back on the memory later. I had everything perfectly planned out, but the moment I reached my doorstep, the entire surprise fell apart. I looked at the number 602 and stepped back to double-check the plaque, my mind going momentarily blank as I stood in the hallway. I couldn't understand why the keypad was rejecting my code after 2 attempts. I knew for a fact that the combination was Ava's birthday, and there was no way I could have forgotten it. Refusing to believe I was wrong, I focused entirely on the keypad and pressed each digit with deliberate precision. The lock emitted a sharp, annoying beep and displayed a message stating that verification had failed and the system was now locked due to an incorrect code. It was obvious that Ava had changed the security code without telling me. I let out a long sigh and reluctantly pressed the doorbell instead. Right after the second ring, a deep, resonant male voice called out from inside, telling me to just leave the food on the doorstep. I stood there paralyzed for a few seconds before backing up again to verify the apartment number one more time. It was definitely Building B, Unit 602, which was undeniably my apartment. I recognized the shoe cabinet because I was the one who picked it out and assembled it. Resting on top was the pair of designer heels I had bought for Ava, which made it even more confusing as to why a man was answering the door. A heavy sense of dread began to pool in my chest as I reached out and hit the doorbell again. The voice inside snapped, asking if I was deaf since he had already told me to leave the delivery outside, and then the door swung open. A tall, lean guy with a sharp look stood there holding a spatula, glaring at me with an aggressive expression. He seemed to hesitate for a split second when he got a good look at me, but his attitude remained confrontational as he demanded to know who I was looking for. I didn't bother giving him an answer and simply shoved past him into the foyer with my suitcase. Ethan Carter grabbed my arm and shouted that I was trespassing, threatening to call the police immediately if I didn't leave. I ignored his threats and started scanning the room, noticing how the furniture had been rearranged and taking in the new decorations and trinkets cluttering the tables. Eventually, I turned my gaze back to Ethan Carter and narrowed my eyes, asking him in a low voice who the hell he was and why he was in my apartment. I demanded to know where Ava was and what right he had to be standing in my kitchen. While Ethan Carter and I were staring each other down in a tense standoff, Ava's sweet voice drifted in from the hallway. She was complaining about what a bad boy he was for sending her such a massive bouquet of flowers that was supposedly a nightmare to carry home. Ava was busy kicking off her shoes at the door, telling him that he owed her a long foot massage to make up for the heavy lifting. She called out his name a couple of times, and when he didn't answer, she looked up and found herself staring directly at me. Every bit of color drained from her face in an instant, and she started stammering my name in total shock. Before the words were even out of her mouth, she dropped her things and came running toward me. Ethan Carter seemed to realize the situation had changed and decided to stop arguing with me, heading back into the kitchen to grab a bottle of wine. Ava acted as if she were overwhelmed with joy and threw her arms around me, as if nothing was wrong. She clung to me and asked why I hadn't called ahead to let her know I was coming, but I felt absolutely no desire to return the embrace. Even after 5 years of dating, the woman standing in front of me suddenly felt like a complete stranger. I didn't waste any time and asked her flat out who the guy was because I have never been one to play games. Ava just sighed and gave me a look of mild annoyance, claiming that I must have forgotten because she had supposedly told me about him already. She explained that she had hired him from the neighborhood as a personal chef to keep her company during meals since eating alone was too depressing. As she spoke, a faint memory surfaced in the back of my mind. Ava worked as a TikTok streamer and her sleep schedule was notoriously messy. Since I was going to be gone for months, I had been worried about her eating habits and constantly ordered healthy meals and salads to be delivered to the apartment. She had complained constantly that the healthy delivery options were incredibly bland and that she was sick of them within the first week. She eventually told me she found a local service where a chef would come by to prepare fresh, nutritious home-cooked meals for about $1,500 a month. It seemed like a great deal since it covered all her meals and ensured she was eating properly while I was away. I remember being fully supportive of the idea when she first brought it up, even sending her an extra $10,000 so she could afford the premium service. She was thrilled about the extra cash, and I figured the matter was settled and she was being well taken care of. What I hadn't realized was that the delivery service had somehow evolved into this guy living in my kitchen. Sensing my disapproval, Ava quickly tried to justify it by saying that Ethan's other clients had canceled, leaving her as his only customer, so he suggested just cooking at the apartment since he had nothing better to do. As she was talking, Ethan Carter walked out with a fresh plate of food, set on the table, and wiped his hands while giving me a polite, if somewhat fake, smile. He remarked about how hard the restaurant business had been lately and suggested that I should take the opportunity to sample his cooking now that I was home. Ava agreed enthusiastically, her eyes sparkling as she insisted that I try the food and hurried to get me some silverware. No sooner had I sat down than Ethan Carter casually suggested to Ava that she should probably get me a drink since I had just arrived from a long trip. Ava realized he was right and gave me a sheepish smile before getting up to find a beverage. She naturally reached for a blue mug on the table, but Ethan Carter clicked his tongue and told her to put it down because that was his personal mug. Ava looked confused and quickly set the mug back down, searching the table awkwardly for another glass, but finding nothing. Ethan Carter chuckled and called her a little airhead before walking over to the cabinet and pulling out a clean glass for her. Ava didn't seem to mind the comment and just went about her business. I sat there in silence, watching them move around the kitchen with a level of coordination and familiarity that suggested they had done this 1,000 times before. For a split second, I actually felt like I was the intruder in their home and that they were the real couple living here. I felt like a guest who had overstayed his welcome in a place that no longer felt like my own. That unsettling feeling stuck with me until Ava finally set the water down and slid into the seat next to me, leaning against my shoulder and taking my arm. She asked why I was being so serious and called me baby, which finally snapped me out of my daze. I had to remind myself that Ava was my girlfriend and that we were the ones who had built this life and this home together. I was just about to say something when a massive crash echoed from the kitchen, followed by the sound of breaking glass. Ethan Carter let out a startled shout, and before I could even stand up, Ava had already bolted into the kitchen to see what happened. I didn't even bother looking toward the kitchen, but I could hear every word of their conversation perfectly. Ethan Carter was sighing loudly, asking her why she was always so clumsy and complaining about having to clean up after her all the time. Ava apologized in a soft, small voice, claiming the plate had just slipped out of her hand. He told her it was fine as long as she wasn't hurt and that the plate didn't matter, and then their voices dropped to a whisper that I couldn't quite make out. I closed my eyes and tried to tune them out because I didn't want to hear whatever secrets they were sharing in my kitchen. A few minutes later, they emerged with their dinner, each carrying a bowl of food. One bowl featured a cute kitten design, while the other had a puppy on it, and they naturally set them down in front of their respective seats. As they sat down, Ethan Carter rubbed the back of his neck and gave a sheepish little grin. He looked at me and remarked that there only seemed to be 2 bowls in the entire apartment, telling me to hang on while he found something else for me to use. Before I could respond, he darted back into the kitchen and returned a moment later with my dinner, served in a cheap plastic Tupperware container. He put the container in front of me with a performance of insincere apology that was almost laughable. I just sat there in silence, watching his every move with a cold, mocking expression as he took his seat again. Ava seemed completely oblivious to the tension or the fact that her boyfriend was eating out of a plastic box while her chef used a real bowl. She was already busy devouring a chicken wing, totally lost in the meal he had prepared for her. She looked up with bright eyes and told me I really needed to try the food because it was amazing. Ethan Carter joined in with a smirk, telling me not to be shy and to just act like I was in my own house. I almost laughed at the irony of his statement, though my laughter was laced with pure rage. What hurt the most was that Ava didn't even blink at his comment, which made it clear she had become completely accustomed to him acting like the man of the house. Her silence and her indifference to the situation were deafening, and it was at that moment that I realized how far gone our relationship truly was. Suddenly, Ethan Carter let out a dramatic gasp and slapped his hand against his forehead as if he had just remembered something important. He mentioned that he nearly forgot to take his medication and that it was supposedly best to take it on an empty stomach. When he pulled the box out of his pocket, I immediately recognized the packaging and felt a sharp jolt of adrenaline. My heart stopped when I saw what was tucked underneath the medication, a small, unmistakable box of condoms. It felt like I'd been blindsided by a sledgehammer to the back of my skull. Ethan Carter gave me a mocking look while dangling a fork from his mouth and told Ava to get him some water. She didn't even hesitate, jumping up to do exactly as he asked like it was her job. I can't even put into words the level of humiliation I felt, knowing that if I took another second of this, I would be the biggest fool on the planet. The moment Ava set the water down in front of him, I surged to my feet and swept everything off the table in one violent motion. Plates, silverware, and the entire hot meal went crashing to the floor in a chaotic mess. Scalloping hot liquid splashed all over Ethan Carter, causing him to leap back with a yelp of pain as he glared at me with pure fury. He barked at me, claiming he had no idea why I was so upset and telling me there was no reason to waste good food. Ava's voice turned shrill as she screamed at me, demanding to know if I had completely lost my mind. She slammed her hands down and told me she had been trying to be patient with my bad mood since I arrived, but that this was going too far. She demanded to know what my problem was and ordered me to apologize to Ethan Carter immediately. I let out a dry, hollow laugh and asked her if she really expected an apology from me. She lifted her chin defiantly and told me that was exactly what she expected, so I didn't hesitate to deliver a sharp slap across her face. Ethan Carter lunged at me in a fit of rage, but before he could lay a finger on me, I planted my boot firmly in his stomach. He went down hard, sliding across the floor into the mess of spilled food and broken ceramics. I pinned him to the floor with my foot on his chest, then reached down to grab the box of Viagra. I ground the pills into the filth on the floor with my heel before shoving the crushed remains toward his face and telling him I would be happy to apologize. I demanded to know what his real angle was and why a simple neighborhood chef would feel the need to bring performance enhancers and condoms to a client's house. Ava looked like she had seen a ghost, her face turning a sickly shade of white. Ava began to stammer, claiming that what I was saying was impossible and that I had it all wrong. She couldn't stop her eyes from drifting toward the open packaging I was holding, which clearly displayed exactly what I was talking about. She bit her lip, and I could see the color rising in her neck as the reality of the situation set in. She looked up at me with wide, panicked eyes, only to see me staring back at her with a look of pure disgust as she started begging me to listen to her explanation. She claimed she had no idea why he had those items and insisted that their relationship was strictly professional. She turned to Ethan Carter and pleaded with him to back her up and explain why he had brought those things into our home. Ethan Carter was too busy choking and struggling under my boot to give her an answer, his eyes filled with nothing but hatred. Since he wasn't talking, Ava grabbed my arm and started crying, swearing on her life that they were just friends and that nothing inappropriate had ever happened. I found it hard to believe that a man and a woman spending every day together, with him bringing her flowers and carrying protection, could be described as a simple friendship. She was trying her best to sell the lie, but I could tell that even she didn't believe the words coming out of her own mouth. I pulled away from her, my face completely devoid of emotion as she started to spiral into a panic. She reminded me of our 5-year history and claimed that she was far too traditional to ever cheat, swearing to God that she was as surprised as I was by the items in his pocket. She was sobbing uncontrollably and making all sorts of dramatic vows to prove her innocence. But I had already reached my limit. I stopped listening to her and turned my attention back to Ethan Carter, who had been acting like he owned the place from the second I walked through the door. Ethan Carter glared at me with bloodshot eyes, his voice dripping with venomous spite as he told me he didn't owe me an explanation. He sneered and suggested that the only reason I was suspicious was because I had a dirty mind and projected my own flaws onto others. He dragged out the last few words as a blatant provocation, but I didn't take the bait and instead pressed my boot down harder on his chest. I asked him in a freezing tone if he expected me to believe he was just popping those pills like candy or using them as some sort of pre-dinner appetizer. I leaned in closer and asked him if the condoms were just for his own personal entertainment when he got bored. I sarcastically pointed out that, by his logic, if I caught them naked in bed together next time, he would probably claim they were just having a deep philosophical discussion about their hopes and dreams. I stood back up and looked down at him, asking him if he actually believed the garbage he was spewing. His face contorted into a mask of rage and embarrassment, and he looked like he was about to burst with indignation because I had called him out so directly. He looked like a pathetic clown at that moment, his hands balled into tight fists as he turned to look at Ava for support. The second their eyes met, she looked away and started staring at the floor, unable to meet his gaze. Ethan Carter gritted his teeth and redirected his fury toward me, claiming through clenched teeth that there was nothing untoward happening between him and Ava. He shouted that the medication wasn't just for sexual performance and insisted he took it because of a lifelong heart condition. He snapped that now that I knew his medical history, I should be satisfied before shoving my foot aside and scrambling to his feet. He bolted out of the apartment without a second glance, slamming the front door behind him with a thunderous bang. Ava stood there staring at the closed door in a daze for several minutes before finally whispering that she had no idea he was actually sick. I whipped my head around to look at her, completely stunned by her incredible naivety or her commitment to the lie. To make matters worse, she had the nerve to turn the tables on me and ask why I was being so aggressive toward him. She told me that Ethan Carter had already been through so much in his life and asked if I had any compassion for the pain I was causing him. I could feel the pulse thumping painfully in my temples, and my head felt like it was about to burst from the sheer absurdity of it all. Looking into Ava's wide, innocent eyes made me want to scream because she was either that stupid or she thought I was. As if she hadn't pushed me far enough, She suggested that we go find him and offer an apology. I felt my energy drain away, and I realized there was no point in talking to her anymore. So I just reached out and grabbed the last bowl of rice sitting on the table. Ava started to say something else, but I didn't give her the chance and slammed the bowl of rice onto the top of her head. Grains of rice went flying everywhere, sticking to her hair and slowly sliding down her face in a ridiculous mess. I looked her dead in the eyes and told her that we were finished and that our relationship was the biggest mistake of my life. She screamed at me that I was insane and refused to accept the breakup, her voice cracking with emotion. She sobbed that I was being cruel and that I had ruined our home by shouting and being violent. Suddenly, she stopped mid-sentence and narrowed her eyes, looking me over as if she had just had a revelation. She asked if this whole display was just a cover for my own infidelity. She suggested that I was the one with someone on the side and that I was just making up excuses to pin the blame on her so I could break up with her. She looked at me with a triumphant expression as if she had just cracked a major conspiracy. She watched my face closely for any sign of guilt, and when she saw my stunned silence at her sheer audacity, she let out a piercing shriek. She screamed that she knew I was cheating on her, her voice echoing through the apartment like a siren. Her eyes filled with tears again, and she began to sob, asking how I could be so cruel as to betray her after all this time. I honestly couldn't decide if she was genuinely that delusional or if she just thought I was stupid enough to fall for such a blatant attempt to shift the blame. It was a masterclass in gaslighting and deflecting responsibility. She had completely ignored the evidence of her own betrayal and tried to make me the villain by manufacturing a lie about me having an affair. It was a desperate attempt to move the spotlight away from her and Ethan Carter and turn me into the one who had to defend himself. She was trying to frame my legitimate suspicions as some kind of unhinged persecution. As I processed her insane logic, my rage began to dissipate, replaced by a cold, hollow feeling as I stared at the woman I had spent the last 5 years of my life with. I wondered when she had turned into this person, or if the sweet girl I thought I knew was just a fantasy I had created. One thing was certain, the love I had for her was completely gone. She seemed to grow uncomfortable under my steady gaze and shifted her weight nervously. Her voice was flat and defensive as she repeated that I was the one who had made a mistake, not her. I asked her if she was absolutely sure about that in a quiet, steady voice. I challenged her to swap phones with me right then and there so we could both see the truth. She visibly flinched and looked down at the kitten bowl she was still holding after it had slipped off her head. The kitten bowl was clearly part of a handmade set with Ethan's puppy bowl, and I realized it wasn't something you could just buy at a store. I remembered her telling me about a month ago that she was going to pottery workshop for a TikTok event, but it was obvious now who she had really gone with. I didn't need any more explanations and just gave her a cold, empty smile. I asked her point blank if they had gone on a vacation together too, and the kitten bowl hit the floor and shattered before she could even answer. I didn't even have to look at her to know that she had dropped the bowl in shock. Her face was likely ghost white as she started to stammer that it wasn't what it looked like and that they weren't really together. I cut her off immediately and told her that I didn't want to hear a single word of her excuses. I couldn't care less about the sordid details of her time with Ethan Carter, and I wasn't going to let her waste another second of my time. Ethan Carter hadn't even tried to hide it, with their matching sets of everything and the way they acted like a married couple in my own living room. Every corner of the apartment was covered in his things, serving as a constant reminder that my home had been invaded and that Ava was the one who had invited him in. Whether or not they had been physical was irrelevant because the betrayal was already complete. I knew with absolute certainty that we were over, but before I could officially end it, I asked her if she was the one who had changed the code on the front door. Ava looked surprised by the question, but eventually nodded and explained that Ethan Carter could never remember the old code. She said she couldn't always hear the doorbell while she was on TikTok, so she let him change the combination to something he would remember, which was August 17th. I repeated the numbers to myself and realized immediately that it was his birthday. I had been trying so hard to keep my composure and not lose my mind. I really thought I could handle the absurdity of it all without completely losing it. However, Hearing that he had changed my door code to his own birthday made my blood boil all over again, and I pulled my hand back to strike her one more time. Ava flinched and stood there trembling, too terrified to even try to move out of the way. She squeezed her eyes shut and braced for the impact, but after a few seconds, nothing happened. She peeked through one eye and saw that I had lowered my hand, which seemed to give her a false sense of security. She actually had the nerve to start smiling and began to tease me about how she knew I could never really hurt her, right before I landed a sharp blow across her cheek. The slap sent her reeling to the floor before she could finish her sentence. I stood over her and told her in a voice like ice that this was my apartment, which I had paid for in full with my own money. I stared into her eyes and made it clear that she had absolutely no right to change a single thing in my home, especially the locks. She just sat there clutching her face, unable to find any words to defend herself. She looked like she wanted to argue, but the words seemed to fail her. I told her that in just 6 months, she had managed to turn my home into a complete disaster. I walked over to the table and picked up Ethan's blue mug along with Ava's matching pink one. I looked at them for a moment before simply opening my hands and letting them plummet to the floor. They shattered into a million pieces, sending shards of ceramic flying across the room. I gave her a mocking little shrug and told her my hand must have slipped. I took a good look around the room and finally realized the full extent of the damage they had done to the place. They had replaced my curtains with these hideous, cheap lace things that made the whole place look like a funeral parlor. My expensive sofa was covered in a garish green fabric with red rabbit pillows, and through the bedroom door, I could see purple sheets embroidered with her name and a swan. The worst part was seeing my custom walnut media console painted a shade of yellow that looked like literal vomit. It was so offensive that I felt lightheaded, and my rage reached a breaking point as I stormed into the bedroom to see what else they had ruined. I immediately noticed a set of bedding that I didn't recognize and let out a cold, sharp laugh. Ava was right on my heels, and her face turned bright red the moment she saw me looking at the bed, and she began babbling another explanation. She claimed that Ethan Carter had gotten drunk after a bad breakup and made a mess on the bed, so he had insisted on buying new sheets to make up for it. She promised to change them back right away and started reaching for her phone to order a new set. I ignored her frantic attempts to fix things and just started taking photos of the room with my phone. When I was done, I told her very calmly that I was calling my lawyer. I informed her that I needed to get a professional estimate of the damages they had caused to my property. Ava looked at me as if I were speaking a foreign language, asking me what on earth I was talking about. I gave her a cold look and asked if she really thought I would just let them destroy my home and accept her pathetic excuses. I made it clear that I wasn't going to just ignore the thousands of dollars in property damage they had caused. I told her that I wasn't running a charity and then walked past her into the home office. She just stood there, looking completely shell-shocked by my sudden change in demeanor. My friend from the firm were quick, and within 90 minutes, they had cross-referenced my original receipts with the current state of the apartment. They informed me that the total property damage and replacement costs came out to exactly $278,000. I laid out all the invoices and the photos on the table for Ava to see, pointing out the major expenses. I explained that the customized kitchen, the media console, and all the tiling in the bathroom and on the balcony would have to be completely redone since they were altered without my permission. When I started to mention the office, she cut me off, looking at me with total disbelief. She snapped that she had given Ethan Carter permission to make those changes and looked at my friends with a look of pure defiance. She asked me why I was being so petty about some furniture and suggested that an apology from Ethan Carter should be enough to settle the matter. She started to reach for her phone to text him, but I tapped on the desk to get her attention. I pointed to the bottom of the document and told her that Ethan Carter wasn't the only one responsible for the bill. I had listed both of their names on the demand for payment and told her they would be splitting the cost. Ava stared at the paper in total shock, her face pale as she asked me how I could be so heartless toward my own girlfriend. She asked if I was really doing this just because she had a male friend over, so I picked up a glass of ice water and threw it in her face. It soaked her hair and ran down her shirt while she sat there gasping. I told her to go see a specialist if she was having trouble understanding that we were over and that this was now a legal matter. I reminded her that she and Ethan Carter had caused significant financial damage to my property, and that if they didn't pay up, I would be happy to let the police handle the situation. Ava's expression darkened, and she screamed my name in fury. Normally, seeing her like that would have made me want to comfort her, but now, I couldn't even stand to be in the same room as her. I started dialing the police right in front of her, which finally sent her into a panic as she lunged forward to end the call. She was shaking with rage as she told me that if I wanted to be like this, fine, we were done, and she warned me never to come crawling back to her. I let out a long breath, my head throbbing from the stress of her continuing to focus on the drama of the breakup rather than the massive bill she owed. To her, the financial damage was an afterthought compared to the emotional theater she was trying to create. Ava made a big show of packing her bags and heading for the door, but I stopped her before she could leave. She paused and turned back with a smug little grin, telling me she knew I wouldn't be able to stay mad at her. She suggested that if I apologized now, she might find it in her heart to stay with me, but I just looked at her with pure pity. I told her I only stopped her because I needed Ethan Carter's contact info, so I could make sure he paid his share of the bill. Her smug look vanished instantly as she grudgingly sent me his contact info and stormed out of the apartment. I caught the sound of her crying in the hallway as I closed the door, but I didn't care anymore because my only priority now was getting my money back. I created a group chat with Ava and Ethan Carter and titled it the Settlement Group. Ava's first message was some nonsense about her love nest, but she deleted it almost immediately when I didn't respond to her drama. I tagged both of them and sent over the itemized bill, informing them that I expected the full amount within 10 days. I muted the group chat immediately after, not caring how they decided to split the cost as long as the money hit my account. I spent the rest of the afternoon ripping out the cheap decorations and throwing away all the junk they had brought into the apartment. Once the hideous curtains and pillows were gone, the place finally started to feel like a home again. I had the locks changed the next day and installed a new security system with cameras inside and out. On the third day, I brought in a professional cleaning crew to scrub the entire place, and while they were working in the bedroom, one of them found something hidden under the bed. It was a shredded set of pink lingerie, and the cleaner asked if I wanted it thrown out. My first instinct was to tell him to burn it, but I decided to take a photo of it first to use as evidence. I stopped him and took a picture of the lingerie, posting it in our group chat to ask who it belonged to. Ethan Carter was quick to reply, arrogantly claiming he had bought it for Ava and mocking me by asking if I was jealous that she never wore things like that for me. I just sent back a calm message stating that since they had used my bed for their little trysts, I was adding the cost of a new mattress and a designer bed frame to the bill. I informed them that would be another $46,000 added to the total. The group chat went dead for a full minute before Ethan Carter started spamming the chat with angry voice notes. I didn't even bother listening to them and just watched the notifications pile up with a satisfied smirk. I just replied by sending over the legal statutes regarding the intentional destruction of property that my lawyer had prepared. That shut Ethan Carter up pretty quickly, and a few minutes later, Ava sent a message asking why I was being so cruel to her. I simply reminded them that property damage of this magnitude could result in a prison sentence of up to 7 years. That seemed to do the trick, and the group went silent for several days until they finally showed up at my apartment on day 8. Ava tried to enter the code to the front door out of habit, but the system rejected her 3 times. I watched her through the camera as the realization hit her that I had completely locked her out of her former life. She called me immediately, sounding frantic as she asked why I had changed the locks and the codes. She admitted to trying my birthday, her birthday, and our anniversary, and she sounded like she was on the verge of a breakdown when none of them worked. She asked if I had really stopped loving her after all of our history together, but I just asked her if she was suggesting I should sue her for emotional distress on top of the property damage. She hung up on me, and I watched the monitor as she stood in the hallway looking completely defeated. Ethan Carter stepped in to comfort her, pulling her close and letting her cry into his shoulder right in front of my door. They stood there clinging to each other for a while, and then they started making out right in front of the camera. It was a pathetic display as they started groaning and groping each other right on my doorstep. I cleared my throat and spoke through the intercom, asking if they wanted me to bring a mattress out for them, though I told them I'd have to charge for it. They both jumped about a foot in the air the second my voice came through the speaker. Ethan Carter panicked and shoved Ava away so hard that she lost her balance and fell flat on her ass. He didn't even stop to help her up before he turned tail and ran down the hallway. Ava sat there rubbing her backside and glaring at the camera before she finally scrambled to her feet and chased after him. I saved the footage and posted it in the settlement group with a message telling them to take their performance elsewhere. Neither of them responded to the video, but I knew they had seen it. With the 10-day deadline approaching, my only concern was the wire transfer. I knew Ava didn't have any money of her own since her TikTok singing career was a total failure, and I had been paying for everything for years. She never took her work seriously and just treated it like a hobby while I subsidized her entire lifestyle. She had been living off my credit card for years, and one of the first things I did after the breakup was cancel her access to my accounts. I was certain she had next to nothing in her personal bank account. Ethan Carter's restaurant was a failing business that was barely staying afloat, so I was genuinely curious how they were going to come up with $320,000. They actually showed up at my door with a briefcase like something out of a bad mob movie. Ava threw the case open and started throwing stacks of cash at me, screaming that this was the money I wanted so badly. I caught the first stack of bills and confirmed they were real, which was quite a surprise. When she tried to grab more to throw at me, I reached out and snatched the briefcase out of her hands. I told her the drama was over and that we were going to the bank to verify the cash. She was fuming as we headed to the bank, where she and Ethan Carter spent the entire time clinging to each other and whispering sweet nothings. Ava kept looking at me as if she expected me to be jealous of their relationship, but I was focused entirely on making sure the money was properly deposited. Once the bank confirmed the funds had cleared, I felt a massive weight lift off my shoulders. I was ready to walk away and never look back, but Ava grabbed my arm. I looked down at her and saw that she was visibly shaking, struggling to find her voice. Just as I was about to shake her off, she managed to tell me that we should never see each other again. She whispered that I would never find another woman as good as her, which was honestly the most delusional thing I had ever heard. She actually seemed to believe it, which was almost enough to make me laugh in her face. I didn't say a word and just pried her fingers off my sleeve one by one before walking away. I gave her a small, tight smile and told her I hoped they lived happily ever after. I walked away without looking back and spent that evening blocking and deleting them from every part of my life. I sold the apartment and moved back to London to focus on my career. 2 months later, I got a call and found out that Ava had tried to break into my old place and ended up in a massive screaming match with the new owners. She had caused such a scene that the police had to be called, and she was currently at the station demanding to see me. It turned out that she had borrowed money from some very dangerous people to pay me back and was now in a desperate situation. She had actually taken out a loan for $500,000 and spent the surplus on a lavish vacation and shopping spree with Ethan Carter. Now, the lenders were coming for their money, and she was completely broke. When the debt collectors started showing up, she turned to Ethan Carter for help. He promised to take care of her, but he skipped town the next morning, taking her phone, her wallet, and every last cent she had left. She had come to my old apartment hoping to beg for my forgiveness, but when she saw the new owner, she lost her mind and started attacking her. Now she was facing assault charges and had nowhere else to turn. The real estate agent asked me if I wanted to go down to the station and talk to her, but I didn't even look up from my laptop. I told him that I didn't know the woman and that the police should just follow standard procedure, because whatever mess she was in was entirely of her own making. I hung up and went back to work, ignoring the video the agent sent me of Ava sobbing on the floor of the precinct. I didn't need to see it to know that she had finally run out of people to manipulate and that she was finally facing the consequences of her actions. At the end of it all, James hung up the phone and got back to his work while Ava was left collapsed on the floor of the precinct in tears, yet he never even bothered to play the video. The most repulsive kind of betrayal isn't just physical infidelity. It is being treated like an idiot by someone who genuinely believes you deserve to be lied to. He had won, And when she eventually found herself buried in debt and abandoned by her lover, she tried to find him in a state of pure desperation, but he never gave her a second thought. There are some people who simply do not deserve your forgiveness, and all you need to do is ensure they can never reach you again.